People First Radio is a program about people, the society in which we live, and issues related to health and wellness.
Welcome to People First Radio. I'm Joe Pugh. A new curriculum aims to teach Canadian high schoolers about homelessness. Erin Dej is one of the Wilfrid Laurier University professors working to develop it. One part of the curriculum is getting students to think about solutions to homelessness. Dej says that homelessness is a complex, very challenging social issue and that there is no single solution. She hopes that students can feel empowered with information through the curriculum, knowing that they can be part of one of the many solutions it will take to move the dial on homelessness in Canada.
My name is Erin Dej. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Criminology at Wilfrid Laurier University in Ontario. I have been doing research on homelessness for about 15 years, working alongside lived experts to think through the social exclusion and criminalization of people who are homeless.
And how are you approaching the idea of teaching high schoolers about homelessness?
So for the last 6 years, myself and my research team have been doing research on perceptions and misperceptions of homelessness, specifically in mid-sized cities, where the growing visible homelessness is having, lots of mid-sized communities react often in punitive ways because they're not sure how to make sense of the homelessness that they're seeing. So as we've been doing that work on understanding and then hopefully helping people to work through these misperceptions of homelessness, we created a documentary called Bridging Divides, Voices and Visions on Homelessness in Mid-Sized Cities. And in that documentary, we feature people with a range of perspectives about homelessness. So we talk to somebody who is experiencing homelessness, somebody who's precariously housed, somebody who is a service provider, a small business owner in a mid-sized city, and a member of law enforcement. And so through us, they have these conversations about homelessness. And so as we were sharing this documentary, it's publicly available for free on YouTube. We were having conversations with community members, and they were really encouraging us to do something more with the documentary and make sure that young people are seeing this documentary. And so that's really what gave us the gusto to pursue this. And so we recognize that young people are seeing homelessness, that they are aware of it, and they have questions. And so we wanted to create curriculum to help them work through and think through this challenging social issue that they do have questions about.
And what does the curriculum contain? What are you teaching the students?
Yeah, so we broke the documentary up into smaller digestible chunks and then built lesson plans around it. So the curriculum consists of 2 mini lessons and 4 full-size lessons. So the 2 mini lessons are an introduction to homelessness, so giving the basic facts and figures about what homelessness looks like in Canada. And the second mini lesson is about a broker dialogue. So that's what we use to create the documentary. And it really helps students think through how to have respectful, productive conversations about big, complex social issues where people might disagree with one another. And then the 4 main lessons, which are about homelessness and have the documentary snippets, are about stigma that people who are homeless experience. The second one is about what happens when there's nowhere for people who are homeless to go. What happens when we move people who are homeless along and don't actually have a place for them to be. The third lesson is about diverse experiences. So we know that people who are homeless experience homelessness differently depending on their social location. So women and gender diverse people, young people, Black and racialized people, Indigenous folks, and members of the 2S LGBTQ plus community. And then the last lesson is around solutions. And so what do we do about this homelessness crisis that we're facing? And that's where in the documentary, some of the people that we talk to describe solutions, but we also want the young people themselves to think about what solutions they see as appropriate to respond to the crisis.
Now, I'm unfortunately not going to be able to get you to teach me the whole curriculum of a course in half an hour here, but I do want to dive into some of those points you talked about in a little bit more detail. One of them was the idea of moving people experiencing homelessness around, and I'm wondering if you can tell me how that plays out and what you would want people to know about that issue.
So we've seen municipalities who are trying to address visible homelessness are usually relying on quite punitive and ineffective approaches. And it's often using trespass orders, eviction notices, bylaws to say that people who are homeless can't be in that particular space, whether it's a park, whether it's a sidewalk, whether it's just a spot in the downtown, let's say. And so what we've seen and research shows us over and over again is that when we use those kinds of strategies, it actually isn't solving the problem. So almost nobody who receives those trespass notices or eviction notices move into any kind of shelter or housing. They simply are shuffled from one spot in the city to another spot in the city. And then they inevitably get another trespass notice or another bylaw infraction, and they move on to the next spot. And it's just a cycle that we see happening. And so what the curriculum gets into is we use a mapping exercise for the students to work through where should somebody go during the day to get their food, have a shower, charge their phone, and sleep at night. And what the students very quickly learn, and it's based on a real community, is that there's often nowhere where somebody who's homeless is allowed to be during the day. And so what do we do then? And then the students create a solution. What should we be doing to support somebody if there's nowhere for them to be to meet their basic needs?
You've talked today about how one of the aspects of this is talking to the students about how you have conversations on maybe difficult subjects where people might have different opinions or might disagree. I'm wondering two things about that. Number one, how do you do that? How do you broach that? And number two, maybe this is the one to start with, what parts of homelessness are that, and what parts of homelessness in Canada as an issue is there kind of broad consensus on, and what parts is there disagreement on?
It's interesting. When we did the documentary, we were expecting a lot of friction, a lot of division between these very different people who come at the issue of homelessness from quite unique perspectives. What we ended up finding was that there is more alignment than we might expect at first. So there was a recognition that everybody needs housing because they're human beings who need somewhere to be, that's a basic human right. There was a recognition that when somebody doesn't have housing, things get worse for them, and that it's hard to take care of yourself when you don't have a stable, secure place to be. And that when that happens, it negatively impacts the person themselves and the community at large. So finding those areas of commonality to build on is a really important part of that broker dialogue methodology that I talked about. So that's really about helping students think through what constitutes a respectful and open conversation. These dialogues can't happen unless people are open to having those conversations, and how to find points of similarity and then work through points of differences, and engaging in active listening, making sure that we're hearing each other and listening to different perspectives and trying to learn from one another.
Part of this as well is students coming up with their own potential solutions to the issue. Can you tell me more about that?
Yep. So every lesson has small activities and then what we call a capstone activity. And these capstone activities are really engaging students to think outside the box and think about what would be an effective, helpful, compassionate response that will help everybody. Because again, part of that broker dialogue that I just talked about is things that will be helpful for unhoused people almost always will be helpful for the broader community. Usually there's a lot of win-wins that we can think of if we're willing to invest and support evidence-based responses to homelessness. So, for example, in that exercise I talked about in Nowhere to Go, where they have to map out where people should spend the day and how they can meet their needs, the second piece of that activity is, when you've seen the challenges that somebody's facing, what should we do? What can we come up with that would help somebody who's homeless manage the day in that community? In the diverse experiences lesson, we have students create a shelter or a transitional housing program that will meet the unique needs of diverse people's experiences. So what would a shelter transitional housing look like for women and gender diverse people? What would it look like to be culturally appropriate for Indigenous folks and things like that? And then in the solutions lesson is really the capstone there is about what's one thing that we can design, that we can create that would move the dial on responding to homelessness in an effective way. So when we piloted it, students felt overwhelmed at first about how do I solve homelessness in its entirety with one solution. And so we revised that curriculum to make sure it's clear, homelessness is too big of a crisis to be solved by one solution, but that doesn't mean that means we do one solution at a time. So what's one thing we can do that will be helpful?
You're listening to People First Radio. My guest is Erin Dej. She's an associate professor in the Department of Criminology at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario. She's been helping develop a curriculum to teach Canadian high schoolers about homelessness. It's expected to be finished ahead of the start of the school year in the fall. The idea for the curriculum came from a documentary that Dej helped create about homelessness in mid-sized cities. Called Bridging Divides, it featured the voices of 5 people from 3 Canadian cities. We're going to bring you a portion of that documentary. You'll hear the voices of Simon, a person with experience of homelessness in Southern Ontario, Chris, a municipal law enforcement officer in Kitchener, Katie, a service provider who oversees housing programs, Monica, who owns a small coffee roasting business, and Sharon, a community advocate living on a fixed income.
I was a pretty good athlete coming out of high school. I ended up going to school in the States on a full-ride scholarship. And here I am, I got the American dream. I got a wife, 2 beautiful kids, I got a beautiful house. She got in trouble, and eventually she didn't want to do nothing to do with me no more, which I don't blame her. I mean, it took me almost 1.5 years, maybe 2 years to figure out why she left me. I moved back to Canada, and just haven't been right since I moved back. I got back into my addiction, which is alcohol, and it just progressed and progressed and progressed. I stopped believing in myself. I lost a positive in Simon, the old guy. You know, being a former football player, I always believe if you can't win, don't step on the field. And that will was gone in me. It was gone. And I remember one time we're playing a football game, and my buddy's sitting next to me, Keith, and we turn around and there's all these people in the stands, and we're looking at him, and I'm thinking, you know what, Keith? Every one of those people in the stands want to be us. They want to be on this field. They want to be somebody. Now, fast forward 25 years later, where I was at, being homeless, there ain't nobody in those stands want to be me.
In the last 5 years, I've really noticed a major surge in homelessness. I would say that it's much more visible in the streets, in the core areas particularly. When I first started in bylaw, homelessness was a far more minor issue that we had to deal with. And within 2 or 3 years of me being in the enforcement world, I really noticed a large increase in homelessness and tents and the people in the core areas.
What I keep hearing is, I never go downtown, even from community and citizens, because it's so bad down there. But it's not. But that's the struggle that the municipalities have to get over. That's the hurdle, because as people are coming down and into the community, they are passing Tent City. They are passing, along the bikes and trails, taking your kids, and there's someone there who's been there all night and, has all their worldly goods with them. So that's what is happening. That's what we're seeing. And everyone is going to see it. It's not just in Toronto, right? It's not just in Vancouver. It's not. We all know it's everywhere. You hear it on the news. So that's the hurdle that I think municipalities are trying to promote their cities, go, yay, come visit us. We're growing. We're still doing great. But we have this homeless problem, and it's very visible, and it's right here.
There's this misperception that people are being dropped off in buses into our community and lots of other communities, and that's not what's happening. I think we're seeing impacts of a global pandemic. We're seeing significant impacts of affordable housing opportunities.
I stayed at a place, a motel here. It was horrible. It basically was a glorified shelter where they stole from us. They were taking people off the streets, ODSP, OW, whatever, charging us for this. The Big 8 motel. At one time it was a Big 8 or Super 8, whatever you want to call it, charging us $1,700 a month. My toilet broke down, 8-9 days to fix it. Air conditioning, heating didn't work, but yet they were taking $1,700 a month from me and my roommate and just didn't care about us. And I'll be honest with you, I'm an ODSP, but if I pay that rent at $850, I don't have much left.
It can feel frustrating at times because, we're trying to help, but there's limited options that we can give to people. So we may just be asking someone to move along from a certain location, and whether or not they have a tent or their belongings with them, then we would be asking them potentially to vacate a certain area and seek shelter either with family or with some of the housing options that are available from the region. But I would say that overall it's there is some sense of helplessness from the enforcement community because we can only offer so much resources and assistance to the homeless community.
When we're working with our outreach team, we're finding a lot of barriers for our clientele in accessing shelters. So whether it's rules or regulations related to shelters, whether it's bed availability, so there's oftentimes the beds are filled in our programs, and then also trauma and stigma related to accessing shelters and what the shelter system actually looks like. Having to share bedrooms with strangers is a barrier, so clients are choosing not to access shelters sometimes because of that. So being able to have options that provide some privacy and also some supports to have partners there, or there's a lot of barriers related to animals and pets that people have, and that's a barrier to accessing shelter systems as well.
If we're not providing enough housing for people, then I think that they have every right to camp wherever they want. And anybody who has an issue with it should maybe give a little try to homelessness. And every time you think that you've found a spot where you can at least feel somewhat safe in a tent, they're being asked to move.
Those were excerpts from the documentary Bridging Divides. The 5 voices you heard brought different life experiences to interviews about homelessness in mid-sized Canadian cities. Erin Dej of Wilfrid Laurier University worked on the documentary and was on the other end of some of the interviews you heard. She's currently working on creating a curriculum for Canadian high schoolers around homelessness. Let's get you back to our conversation. When you share that there seems to be more consensus than you would have expected on a lot of aspects of homelessness as an issue, or people's views on homelessness as an issue, and you also share the idea that people seem to recognize that any kind of measure that helps someone who is homeless also has significant benefit to the wider community. When you look at those facts together, can you explain to me how we have come to have what you would describe as a crisis around homelessness in the first place?
I think there's a few things going on. I think that lots of supports for people who are homeless are in parts of a city, and we've done this work in several cities, including in BC. A lot of these supports are in neighborhoods where people themselves are precariously housed, where there's a lot of instability themselves, right? So we don't see a lot of supports and programs for homelessness in let's say the more wealthy or the more affluent parts of the neighborhood. And so I think some of the pushback we're seeing around some of these solutions is in neighborhoods where they may be struggling themselves. And so what we want to think about is, first of all, how to make sure that communities are sharing the load and making sure that every part of the city is doing its part to respond to homelessness, but also recognizing how we can help each other out. So one example, that we hear about a lot when there's pushback on homelessness supports or programs, is people who are homeless might be using or not using there's no bathroom to use. So they might be urinating or defecating in public spaces. And nobody I know who's homeless wants to urinate or defecate in a public space. It's because there's no access to public washrooms. And so when a community, let's say, pushes back on a drop-in space or a daytime shelter or whatever it might be, if they are complaining about unhoused people, using an alleyway as a washroom or whatever it might be, well, actually, it's a win-win to have a drop-in space or a day space where people can use the washroom. And so that's just one example of many examples where, while there's initial resistance to programs that support people who are unhoused, actually it will work out for everybody, and it will address some housed people's concerns and unhoused people's concerns if we invest in some of these solutions.
The scenario you're speaking about there of neighborhood pushback or concerns about service concentration has in fact just played out very directly in Nanaimo, where I'm speaking to you from, where a daytime drop-in hub was just closed at the end of March, with the city council citing concerns and pushback from the community. The city is actually willing to still fund the service if they can find a new building that is willing to lease the space to them that is in a different neighborhood. I'm wondering if you can speak to me about that idea of concerns around service concentration and what the way out of it is for a municipality of the size of somewhere like Nanaimo.
Mm-hmm. It's very tricky, and I wish I had a good answer. I don't have a good answer, but here's some of the things that I have been thinking about. There's two things. So I fully understand the resistance some neighborhoods have, because they're saying, hey, listen, we have, the brunt of supports and programs in our neighborhood. We've sort of reached our max, and it's not fair that other neighborhoods, again, maybe those more affluent or wealthy neighborhoods, don't have any of this. I hear that, and I think it's important. And we recognize that a lot of the reasons why those wealthier neighborhoods don't have homelessness services and supports is because they have a lot of social and political clout to push back when there is even a suggestion that some of those programs might exist in their neighborhood. And low-income neighborhoods, for example, maybe don't have that same, what we call social capital. So there's that piece. At the same time, we also recognize that it's helpful to have services and supports in, a centralized location. It would be very difficult to have unhoused people have to, for example, bus from one neighborhood to another or walk from one neighborhood to another to be able to access services. So that's a tension that I don't know what the answer is, but it's something I think we need to at least name and think through. The second piece that has really come to light for me over the last couple of years is we see lots of communities and neighborhoods say, we want to support this resource or service or program, just not here. What I have come to see is every neighborhood says that. Every neighborhood says just not here. And I've seen it play out even in locations that I would say are, for example, in like industrial zones where concerns about being near schools or what I hear a lot is community aesthetic, which I really struggle with that one, where that wouldn't be an issue because it's in an industrial zone. Still in those locations, we see that same rhetoric of, oh, this just isn't the right neighborhood for it. This isn't the right place for it. And so that's where there's a lot of frustration. And we can't keep saying that because every neighborhood that says, oh, well, just not here means that it goes nowhere.
And I should add, for context, in Nanaimo, I would say the situation is one where the neighborhood is perhaps less affluent than other parts of the city and does feel like there is already a significant concentration of services in the area, which maybe gets to that other point you were mentioning where when there are already certain services in the area, if you were to put something 45 minutes away by bus in a different part of the city, that might also create some challenges. Do you have any ideas on how to work through that part?
Unfortunately, I don't. I think that's something we've noted, and I see that tension. I think there is no clear answer. I think maybe some of the solutions could be putting services that are maybe less survival based. Maybe those could be put in those wealthier neighborhoods, those neighborhoods, that it would be maybe those kind of services that people don't access every day, that we could provide, public transportation or things like that to get to services in neighborhoods that it doesn't have that level of concentration. The other thing that we could see happen is those wealthier neighborhoods supporting those other neighborhoods where there is a concentration of resource. Financially supporting, socially supporting, making sure there's lots of investment in those neighborhoods for other services as well. Like, for example, a strong business supports and things like that for coffee shops and things like that. So if we're going to invest in homelessness services in those less affluent neighborhoods, we need to fully resource those neighborhoods to be vibrant in all aspects, not only in services and supports for people who are homeless.
This is People First Radio. I'm Joe Pugh. My guest is Erin Dej. She's an associate professor of criminology at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario. Dej is currently working on a curriculum to teach Canadian high schoolers about homelessness. That project was inspired by a documentary Dej worked on, which premiered in 2024, called Bridging Divides. The documentary featured 5 people from 3 mid-sized Canadian cities. One with experience of homelessness, one working in municipal enforcement, one small business owner, one service provider, and one community advocate living on a fixed income. Here is a portion. The first voice you'll hear is a participant named Simon speaking about some of his experiences with homelessness.
People said, it's not Simon. Simon would never be like that. It happened. Part of it was my mental issue. When you sit there, think about this. I lost my brother and my dad 7 weeks apart. I was losing my business. I was about to get divorced, taking care of my mother 6 hours away because I lived in the United States. If that wasn't enough to just give up, but I did it, and I persevered through it as much as I could.
We all know when you lose hope, it's really hard to get back up, to even nourish yourself, let alone try and find work or, a place to live, to turn things around. And there's no supports for that. I mean, there may be some, but it's not enough. And I think that there has to be a lot more happening in the mental health part of it. But I definitely think that hopelessness it kind of keeps them in that same situation.
I was in the shelter in Cambridge. We had a situation there, which I'm assuming, police officers come there a lot. A guy walked in, it was a guy I played college football with. He was a sergeant. And he said, "Simon, what are you doing here?" And I lied, and I said I was a volunteer. Because I felt that shame, that guilt. Here I am, and he's talking to me, like, "Well, yeah, man, remember those times?" And I'm sitting there going, mm-hmm. But it was also negative towards me because all of a sudden everybody in there thinks I'm talking to these cops like I'm some, you know what I mean? So it turned out to be a little bit of a negative that night. But yeah, I mean, I guess the hardest part about this whole thing and this journey of being in this group is coming out and saying, you know, I'm not ashamed. It is what it is. I am who I am, and this is what I'm going to do.
I think we need mental health support so strongly, right? Because if you've lost everything, how can you get yourself back together, right? You need people to help you. Social services and a safety net for people. There's people who will never, ever in our society be able to be helped. I believe that. An 80-20 rule. There are people who will never be better. So how do you help that? And the people that can get better need just to know how to navigate that system.
So I think that in terms of people that want help, one of your other interviewers said that 80% of the people are interested in help and can be helped, whereas maybe 20% are beyond help. And that's a challenge for a lot of people. It's a challenge for society and law enforcement and government, is what can be done with that other percentage of the population that simply doesn't want help or can't be helped. And I think that it's a very difficult question to answer.
If I believed that people were beyond help, I couldn't go do what I do every day. I will never believe that. I think, and that is why I can get up every day and go to work and do what I do, because I don't believe that. And I've seen firsthand the people who have been labeled as beyond help, who are incredible human beings and are doing amazing things right now. And some of them are my peer support workers. And I think, and those are the people that can bring support and guidance and hope for the clients that I'm working with. But I could never believe that people are beyond help.
There's a reluctance from their community to accept help, and that they can be very challenging to deal with. So you can try to help somebody, but they're not receptive to it. They are hostile in some cases. They can be aggressive or rude, and it leads to frustration, in the enforcement community, where you're trying to help somebody, but they simply don't really seem to want it. So I think that's a big challenge.
I don't think anybody is beyond help. I think that we need to look at what has happened to them. Like when you experience trauma, we don't know, and I'm not a therapist, and I'm not trained, but if somebody has experienced horrific trauma, and we know that people have, then we need to just work with them. And is it going to take longer? Yes. And do they need more help? Yes. But they deserve it. They're human, just like we deserve to be treated as a human being. So whatever help they need is what they should be getting, because nobody is that hopeless.
You just heard a portion of Bridging Divides, a documentary about homelessness in mid-sized Canadian cities. The full video is available on YouTube. It's called Bridging Divides Full-Length Film. Throughout today's program, we've also been hearing from Erin Dej, who worked on that documentary. She's an associate professor in the Department of Criminology at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario. She's currently working on a curriculum to teach high schoolers about homelessness. Let's get you back to our conversation. When we're talking about the curriculum you've designed for high schoolers around homelessness in Canada, where is it going to go? What courses would students encounter this in?
So that's been another surprise for us, is how many courses this is relevant for. So when we originally were thinking about it, we thought, a civics class or a law class is the ideal courses that we were thinking about. But as we've been touching base with teachers and getting feedback from high school teachers, they have seen a lot of applicability to other courses. So history courses, English, arts-based courses, whether it's drama or art. And then there's really some niche courses, some specialty courses, like some courses that some schools offer in social justice, business courses, things like that, that teachers themselves are telling us there's a lot of relevance to. So we're very keen for teachers to take this curriculum and run with it, do what they want with it. We'd be happy to see it adapted to meet different teachers' needs depending on the course.
Well, how and when are teachers going to be able to find the curriculum?
We are hopeful and optimistic that the curriculum is going to be developed and done by mid-summer 2026. So we're really aiming for that so that teachers will have it ready for the fall. And it is going to be free, publicly available. We're working with the University of Guelph right now to package it in a way that's accessible and easy for teachers. And we're hoping to share it through the Homeless Hub. So homelesshub.ca is an amazing resource for research on homelessness and have been wonderful partners with us. And so we're hoping to share it there.
And when you're designing a curriculum that is going to be maybe targeted to launch in the fall of 2026, how do you make sure that it is future-proofed?
That's a great question that we have thought about. The challenge is the homelessness crisis is evolving so quickly and changing so rapidly that, this is my passion. I have been, again, working in the area of homelessness for well over a decade. So it's something that I will continue to update and reflect on over the years. So what's great about an online resource is we can quickly change things as necessary. For example, that Introduction to Homelessness mini lesson has some of those facts and figures. We've had to update them from when we first designed them in November to changes in federal numbers on the homelessness population in April. So we're constantly revising to make sure that it's as up to date as possible.
Well, when you talk about homelessness as an issue that's evolving in Canada, could you take me through maybe what parts of it are staying the same year to year and what parts of it are maybe new developments as we're having this conversation now in spring 26?
That's a big question, and I'll try to make a concise answer. We see that homelessness is getting worse. We know that the number of people experiencing homelessness is rising. We saw, in the last 5 years, at least a 20% increase in homelessness nationally. We saw an 88% increase in unsheltered homelessness. So when we talk about the rise of visible homelessness, that's what we're seeing is more people who are visibly homeless than ever. And we know that there is more diversity in who's experiencing homelessness. So we see over the course of the last 30 years, certainly more young people, more women and gender diverse people, more racialized people experiencing homelessness than ever. So that's what we see as trends over the last 30 years. And yeah, those numbers that I said have changed over the last few months was federal point in time count numbers on the number of people experiencing homelessness. So a few months ago, the latest numbers were that 40,000 people a night are experiencing homelessness in Canada. And just a couple of months ago, they revised it to say 60,000 people are experiencing homelessness every night in Canada. And that's surely an underestimate. We know that there's even more hidden homeless than that, but those are the numbers that we have at the federal level. What we do see changing is our response to homelessness. So for a long time, over a decade now, at the federal level, we've emphasized a housing first model. So providing people with a home and then wraparound supports to support them to maintain that home and their well-being. We have seen in the last few years, especially with that rise of visible homelessness, a retraction of housing first and an increased emphasis on short-term emergency responses, like building more shelters and temporary responses rather than providing people with permanent housing and then the supports to do that. So that's ever changing. The policy landscape in Canada is constantly in flux. And so there's a lot of people advocating for a return to and an increased fidelity to housing first, making sure that we're doing housing first right. But right now we're seeing sort of quick responses to try to deal with visible unsheltered homelessness.
And the curriculum, I understand, was also informed by people who have experience of homelessness. What did those folks contribute to it?
Absolutely. So we've been working with a team of researchers with lived experience of homelessness over the 6 years that this research has been undertaken. So including in the curriculum, they're a fantastic group of folks who are with us every step of the way. So they have made sure that the activities that we're developing and the information that we're sharing in the curriculum is relevant and accurate to the lived experience of homelessness. So they've really helped us make sure that it's grounded in real people's stories and the true to life experience of what it means to be homeless. So everything that we've produced in this curriculum and in the broader research has gone through their eyes, and we've made changes depending on what they see as needed to make sure that it's relevant.
Is there any maybe particularly illustrative example of a tidbit or an anecdote or a chunk of the curriculum that has been shaped by that input?
Yep. So they've so as the curriculum is being developed, they've looked at 3 of the lessons so far. So we're still developing the other ones, but in those lessons, for example, in the solutions lesson, one of our researchers, Deborah, made sure to add language around any solution helps. She really wanted to make sure students felt empowered rather than overwhelmed by what it means to create a solution to homelessness. So she wrote out for us what it would look like for students to make sure that they feel like their voice is heard and their voice matters and their solutions are good ideas that we should work with. So that's one example. They also, went through the introduction to homelessness lesson and made sure that the facts and figures that we provide in there are the ones that we should be included. So for example, about the percentage of young people who are experiencing homelessness and the percentage of older adults who are experiencing homelessness for the first time. They also helped us make sure we had provided a lot of stats, a lot of facts and figures, and they encouraged us to make sure that it was grounded in lived experience. So in the curriculum, after we provide all those facts and figures, we use a quote from our previous research project that this comes from that illustrates that these are real people, that we can talk numbers all day, but there are people behind those numbers. So those are just 2 quick examples of where they've continued in the best way to push me and push us as a research team to make sure that lived voice is central in all of this.
How are you hoping that this curriculum for high schoolers around homelessness in Canada, how are you hoping it ultimately impacts society?
So again, I have a 13-year-old daughter who has lots of questions about homelessness. She gets a lot of answers from me, but not everybody has a mom who has devoted their life to this. So we recognize that young people have questions and we want to give them some basic information, but then also help them think through their own perspective on homelessness. There's nothing in the curriculum that is prescriptive. We don't tell the young people what to think or how to think about homelessness. We are giving them the research and the evidence that we have and helping them walk through their own perspective and their own opinion about homelessness. So that's really the essence, is empowering young people with information so they can come to their own conclusions and think through these big ideas themselves. Also, I would say it's recognizing that this homelessness is a complex, very challenging, dynamic social issue, that there is no one response and one solution that will solve it. And rather than that being defeating, a feeling of defeat, like, oh, there's no one solution, hopefully it can actually feel empowering. Well, if it's going to take multiple solutions, I can be part of one of those solutions that can move the dial on homelessness.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation today on this?
No, I appreciate being able to talk about this and share this. It's been very important to us as a team that the documentary is free to the public and that this curriculum will be free to teachers. So that's central to all of this work. And we would love for the curriculum to be taken up across Canada. Homelessness exists in communities of all sizes, in all provinces and territories. And so we're really hoping that it can cast a wide net across the country.
Erin Dej, thank you very much for taking the time to speak about it with me.
Thank you so much.
Erin Dej is an associate professor in the Department of Criminology at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario. We were talking about a new curriculum she's been working on to teach high schoolers about homelessness.
People First Radio, People First Media, and People First Stories are community media projects of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society and are produced in Nanaimo, British Columbia. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society or its broadcast, podcast, and social media partners.